They said his eyes never closed. They said the candlelight in his window never dimmed. And they said when he finally died, his gaze remained wide open. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. The house on Vodichkova Street, Prague. The cobbled streets carried whispers more enduring than the tolling of the bells. At the corner of Vodichkova Street stood a house of stone, narrow and grey, its shutters bowed like tired eyelids. The neighbors swore that no one inside ever slept, and at the heart of those whispers was a boy named Janek Varga. Janek was 12 when people first noticed his affliction, or curse as some preferred to call it. His family's dwelling, modest and damp, was lit by a flickering candle each night until dawn. Merchants passing in the early hours claimed to see the boy's pale face staring through the window, his eyes two hollow lanterns. Some crossed themselves, muttering prayers, while others whispered that he was a child of ill omen. The Varga family was not wealthy. His father Miroslav worked at the iron foundry, returning home coated in black dust, while his mother Aneta sewed garments for the local market. They had 3 children, Janek the eldest, his younger sister Marika, and an infant son who neighbors noted cried more than most. Yet it was Janek who drew all eyes, a boy without sleep. From his 10th birthday onward, Janek ceased to rest. The first nights were marked by complaints of nightmares, shadows moving across his walls, voices murmuring his name. His parents dismissed it as childish imagination, but as weeks grew into months, they saw the truth. His eyes refused to close. Doctors were summoned. Laudanum was pressed between his lips. Bitter herbs brewed by old women of the quarter were forced upon him. Priests came, whispering blessings, pressing crucifixes to his brow. Even a mesmerist from Vienna attempted hypnosis, yet Janek resisted all. His head would loll, his body slacken as if descending into slumber, but his eyes always remained half-lidded, fluttering then opening once more. The lack of sleep should have killed him swiftly, yet Janek endured, though transformed. His cheeks hollowed, his skin turned waxen, his body trembled with each passing day, and worst of all was the expression he bore, not simple fatigue, but a fixed terror, as though every hour he fought an unseen hand dragging him towards some pit beyond mortal reach. Whispers in the night. The neighbors began to notice strange occurrences around the house. By midnight, soft murmurs drifted into the street. Some swore they heard their own names called. Others claimed to hear a child laughing. Those brave enough to linger described shapes flickering in the windows, elongated shadows, more bodies than the house could hold. An old man who lived across the street, Joseph Havel, told the parish that he once saw Janek convulsing in his chair. The boy's mouth opened as though screaming, Joseph said, yet no sound came, and behind him the walls swam with black figures. His testimony was dismissed as drunken rambling, yet others whispered it matched what they too had glimpsed. Soon children refused to pass the Varga house after sundown. Market women crossed themselves when Aneta appeared, muttering that she carried misfortune in her skirt. Even Marika, once a lively child, was said to have grown pale and quiet as though afraid of speaking in her brother's presence. A father's record. It is here in a surviving fragment of Miroslav Varga's writing that we first glimpse the family's despair. Found decades later in a leather-bound ledger, his words remain a chilling record of their nights. The boy trembles when the dark comes. He says the shadows gather near his bed. He tells me they speak his name. I try to comfort him, but when I turn the air feels thick. I light the candles but the flame bends away, as if something draws upon it. He will not lie down. He says if he sleeps, they will drag him where the living do not return. I fear for him, and I fear for us. Miroslav was a man of iron and ash, hardened by labor, yet his journal bears the strain of terror. The writing stutters, the ink smudged by shaking hands. He began marking the nights by tally, but soon the tallies gave way to pleas. Lord preserve him, Lord forgive us. A community uneasy. Prague in the 1890s was a city of contradictions, a place of art, science and industry, but also of superstition. While the modernists raised coffee houses and theaters, the poorer quarters clung to charms and whispered prayer. In such soil, the story of Janek spread like creeping ivy. Physicians of the Charles University dismissed it as hysteria. The boy suffers delusions from prolonged wakefulness, one lecturer declared, though he admitted never having examined him. Priests claimed it was demonic torment, urging the family to attend confession. Others, more fearful, whispered that the Vargas themselves had consorted with forbidden practices, and the boy was the prize. The tension thickened when a midwife reported seeing Janek's reflection absent from the mirror. She claimed that when Aneta brushed the boy's hair, no second image appeared behind him. The story was swiftly denied, yet once told it rooted deep. Soon people crossed the street to avoid passing his window, a candle that never went out. Night after night, the candle burned in the boy's chamber. The wax ran down in streams, puddling on the sill. Some believed it was a signal, a ward to keep something at bay. Others whispered it was an offering, a light for the shadowed ones to follow. Children dared one another to peer up at his window after midnight. Most returned shaken, swearing they saw his pale face, wide eyes unblinking. Watch. One boy claimed Janek raised a hand and pressed it to the glass, his fingers twitching as if hooked by unseen wires. And always, the shadows, distorted shapes that moved against the wall though no one else stirred within. Some said they saw multiple heads bending over the board. Others whispered the silhouettes climbed the walls like insects. The beginning of the record, what began as whispers in the street soon grew into written testimony. The Vargas, desperate for understanding, allowed certain visitors into their home, doctors, priests and curious neighbors. Many of their words survive in brittle papers tucked into parish archives and private collections. One doctor, Dr. Ludwik Róžička, noted, "The boy appears physically exhausted beyond natural endurance, yet consciousness persists. His pulse is weak but steady. When commanded to close his eyes, he resists with violent spasms. Laudanum administered, no effect. When reclining, he convulses as if drowning, gasping for breath, though no obstruction is present. When upright, the condition stabilizes though terror is evident." Another record, written by Father Peter Kavan, described an attempted exorcism. "When I placed the crucifix in his hand, the boy shrieked not from his own mouth but from elsewhere. The sound seemed to pour from the corners of the room. Shadows grew long though the lamps burned steady. I commanded the name of Christ but the shadows only thickened. I could not proceed. The neighbors fear." By 1892, the Vargas stood alone. Few dared to approach their door, fewer still to enter. Those who did, claimed the house smelled of damp wax and iron. The walls trembled at night though no cart passed the street. The infant grew sickly, his cries fading into weak whimpers. And Marika, she was rarely seen at all. The family was cursed in the eyes of the community, yet the Vargas could not leave. Where would they go carrying such a burden? Their poverty held them bound, and their love for Janek, though strained by terror, kept them tethered to his side. And still, the boy remained awake, his body thinned, his eyes sunk deeper, his hands twitched constantly, as if plucking threads unseen by others. The question that haunted them, it is here the first great question, was whispered by the neighbors, then written by Miroslav himself. What if he is not kept from sleep, but kept from waking? For if the boy's condition was not a refusal of rest, but a binding in some realm between, then the candlelight was not a ward but a beacon. And if that was true, then every night the shadows drew closer, not to torment him, but to complete what had already begun. The ledger breaks off here, ink smeared, words unfinished, yet his question lingers, like the candle still burning in the darkened room. The first true record of Janek's condition came not from the physicians of the university, but from the neighbors, who lived close. Their testimonies, gathered later by parish scribes, tell of a child who seemed neither fully alive, nor yet dead. The night of the lamplighter, on the 12th of February 1892, Prague was locked in a bitter frost. A lamplighter named Otakar Beneš was making his rounds, trimming the wicks and sparking the gas lamps into bloom. Passing the Vargasos' home, he halted mid-step. He would later swear he saw the boy standing inside, pressed close to the window. Janek's hands were braced against the glass. His eyes glared wide, mouth half open as though whispering. Otakar leaned closer and saw, reflected faintly in the pane, two other faces hovering behind the boy. One was long, featureless, like a smudge of smoke shaped into a skull. The other was sharper, almost like the profile of a woman, though her mouth stretched impossibly wide. Startled, Otakar dropped his taper and fled. He did not finish his rote that night. When pressed the next morning, he admitted he was sober and sure of what he saw. It was not a trick of the frost, he said. The glass steamed from within. Something was breathing beside him. This tale spread quickly, reinforcing what others already suspected. Janek was not alone in his room, though the Vargas swore he slept there by himself. The mother's confession. Not long after, Janek Varga confided in her sister, whose account survives in a letter. He will not close his eyes, even when he begs me to make him sleep. He clings to me, shaking. When I try to lay him down, he convulses, so violently I fear he will break his bone. He whispers that they are waiting, that they stand at the foot of his bed. He says they reach for him. I have felt it myself. The air grows cold, and the candle gutters though no draught is there. I hold him until the morning light, but my strength is failing. This was the first direct testimony from inside the family. It painted a portrait not only of Janek's torment, but of the suffering that consumed the household. The sisters' silence. By spring, neighbors noticed that little Marika was rarely seen out. Once she had run laughing through the square, her hair tied with red ribbons. Now she stayed inside, her pale face peering through the cracked shutters. One neighbor, Alžbeta Novakova, reported hearing the girl muttering to herself in the courtyard. She sat upon the stone step, Alžbeta said, rocking back and forth. I asked what troubled her, but she would not look at me. Only she said, "They will not let him go, and they will not let me speak." Then she fled indoors. From that day, Marika was scarcely glimpsed again. Whether it was illness, fear, or something else, none could say, but the household's isolation grew heavier, as if the family was barricading themselves against a siege no one else could see. The physician's visit. In April, Dr. Ruzicka returned for a second examination. His notes, brittle but legible, detail what he encountered. The boy sits upright at all times. Even when drowsiness overtakes him, he refuses to recline, insisting he will be taken if he does. When compelled to lie upon the bed, his body seizes violent. His chest constricts. His eyes roll, but they do not close. When restored to the chair, his breathing eases. He mutters continuously, though the words are faint and often incoherent. Occasionally, he addresses unseen presences, saying, "Leave me, or I will not follow." The physician concludes with a note that chills the reader even now. At one point I pressed my ear near the boy, thinking to catch his words. I perceived quite distinctly a second voice, not his own, not human in quality, whispering from behind his chair. The words were in no tongue I know. I confess I fled the chamber, ashamed of my terror. That line, ashamed of my terror, was underlined twice. The community fractures. By midsummer the Vargas were pariahs. Market women refused Aneta's garments, claiming the fabric carried a chill. Miroslav found himself shunned at the foundry, the men muttering that he brought bad luck upon their furnaces. Even Josef Havel, once sympathetic, declared, "It is not natural, the boy belongs to the grave, yet he walks among us still." Some urged the parish to intervene. Others demanded the Vargas be cast out of Prague entirely, yet still no one dared enter their house after dark. The family lived like lepers, surrounded by whispers, and eyes that never met their. The flickering candle. One account survives from a traveling monk, Brother Ignác, who lodged in Prague that summer. He wrote in his journal, "I passed by the Varga house at the hour of matins. A single candle burned in the window. The flame wavered, though no breeze stirred the street. As I gazed, the candle split in two, as though reflected by an unseen glass. Yet there was no mirror, only the boy's face staring out, eyes wide as ever. Behind him I thought I saw a hand, long and thin, reach toward the flame. It vanished when I blinked." This imagery, the flame doubling, a hand reaching, became part of the folklore of the quarter. To some, it was proof of demonic influence. To others, it was simply the fevered imagination of a passing stranger. But for those who lived nearby, it was one more reason to bar their shutters, and quicken their steps past the Varga home. The father's decline. Miroslav himself began to wither. Colleagues at the foundry described him as distracted, his skin sallow, his hands trembling even when lifting simple tools. Once, he was found asleep at his station, face pressed against the anvil. When roused, he muttered, "I hear them even here, they follow me." In his ledger, another entry appears. "The boy begged me last night not to close my eyes. He said, 'If you sleep, they will come for me stronger.' I kept watch until dawn, but I confess I drifted. I woke to him clawing at my sleeve, his nails drawing blood. He said, I left him alone, that they touched him. I see marks upon his arms, long as fingers. I swear to God, they were not made by any hand I know. The ink trails off here." As though Miroslav's hand shook too violently to continue, a family surrounded. By August, the Vargas lived as prisoners.
Neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. Children whispered rhymes about the boy with open eyes. The parish debated excommunication, though Father Cavan argued that the family were victims, not sinners. Yet even he refused to return to the house. And still, the candle burned. And still, the boy remained awake. Janek himself grew weaker, yet his voice carried further. Several neighbors claimed they heard him whispering in the small hours, his words traveling through walls and shutters. Some insisted he called their names directly, drawing them from restless sleep. One woman, Klara Dvorakova, testified that she awoke to find Janek's shadow upon her ceiling. Though her window was shut tight, it moved as though he were there in the room, she said, but when I lit the lamp it was gone.
The unanswered question. The stories swirled, building a storm around the Vargas home, yet still, the central mystery remained unanswered. Why had Janek ceased to sleep? The physicians claimed exhaustion of the nerves. The priests spoke of demons. The neighbors whispered of curses. But within the house, another theory was forming, a darker one. In the final pages of Miroslav's ledger from that summer, he writes, "It is not that he cannot sleep. It is that something waits for him when he does. He has seen it. He tells me they wait in numbers. He tells me they are patient. I begin to wonder if the boy is not cursed at all, but chosen." The ink smears again, this time as though the pen itself was dragged across the page. The next entry is nearly illegible, but the final line can still be read. If chosen, then for what? And that question, dark, unspoken, yet ever present, hung over the house like the candle flame itself, flickering, trembling, refusing to go out. The story of Janek Varga might have remained confined to a few frightened neighbors, had not certain documents been uncovered, letters, journals, and testimonies that when pieced together reveal a family drowning in shadows. These papers, brittle with age, preserve a truth more terrifying than rumor. The aunt's letters. Among the most revealing are a series of letters written by Aneta's sister, Dorota, to her husband in Kutna Hora. Preserved in the parish archive, they detail her visits to the Varga home. I sat with my sister as the boy rocked in his chair, his eyes wide as if startled by something none of us could see. He begged her to keep the candle burning, and when she hesitated to trim the wick, he wept as if the flame itself was his only tether. He told me that when the light falters, the shadows draw close, and I swear to you, brother, I felt it myself. The room chilled though the stove was hot, and my skin prickled as though brushed by unseen fingers. I will not go again. Her later letters grow more frantic. Aneta looks worn to nothing. She scarcely eats. The child Marika has grown thin and silent, her eyes darting always toward her brother as though she fears him. The infant cries without ceasing. I fear the house is sick with some present. When I left, I washed my hands with salt and would not let my children touch me until morning. These letters spread within the extended family, and soon no relative dared to visit. The Vargas stood utterly alone. The sister's drawing. Years later, in a trunk sold at market, a strange drawing surfaced, said to be the work of little Marika, scrawled in charcoal upon yellowed paper. It depicts her brother seated in his chair, his eyes wide. Surrounding him are tall, crooked figures, their arms long as branches, their heads bowed toward him. Above them a candle burns, but the flame is drawn as an eye, open and staring. On the reverse side, in a child's hand, is written, "They are waiting. They do not want him to close." Whether authentic or not, the drawing now resides in a private collection, but the effect it had on the community was profound. Once shared, it convinced many that the child himself was merely a vessel, and that what surrounded him was far more sinister. The midwife's visit. In September of that year, Aneta, desperate for aid, summoned an old midwife named Katerina Holubova, known for her knowledge of folk remedies. Katerina's testimony, given decades later, paints a chilling scene. The boy sat stiff upon the chair. His eyes were sunk deep, yet they burned with a strange brightness. I placed herbs upon the stove and bade him inhale, but he choked and pushed them away, saying the shadows would only feed upon the smoke. His arms bore marks, 5 long welts upon each, as though grasped by hands larger than his own. I told the mother to sprinkle salt at the threshold and burn juniper. She obeyed, yet the boy only laughed a hollow sound. He said, "They have already crossed. Nothing you scatter will keep them out." Katerina never returned. She later told the parish that the boy was beyond saving, for he was already half taken. The priest's journal. Father Petr Kovan, the parish priest, kept a journal during this time. Though he had attempted an exorcism months earlier, he continued to write of the family with a mix of dread and pity. "I am torn. The boy suffers. Of that there is no doubt. Yet what torments him seems not wholly within, nor wholly without. It is as if he straddles two realms. I fear his condition draws darkness not only upon himself, but upon all who linger near. When I sleep I dream of his open eyes watching me. I awake chilled. Though my room is warm, I cannot banish the thought that his wakefulness is not his curse alone but ours." This entry is dated the 23rd of September. It is the last time Father Kovan mentions the Vargas in his journal. The rumors of the street, the gossip of the quarter grew darker as autumn deepened. Some said they heard voices spilling from the Vargas house even when all inside was silent. Others swore they saw more figures entering the home than the family numbered, shadows slipping through the door when it opened. One story claimed that the foundry bell tolled at midnight without cause, and that Miroslav was seen walking the streets soon after, muttering prayers with bloodied hands. Another tale insisted Annetta was glimpsed digging at the frozen earth behind the house, burying something wrapped in cloth. None dared approach to see, whether true or not. These tales bound themselves to the family, wrapping them in a cocoon of suspicion and fear. The ledger resumes. In October, Miroslav's ledger picks up once more. His words are nearly illegible, as though written in haste. He does not speak to us now. He speaks to them. His lips move though no sound comes forth. Marika says she hears them answer. I forbid her to say more. My wife weeps. The infant is ill, always cold, though we keep the fire high. Last night I saw the boy's shadow move when he did not. It bent over him though he sat still. I will not write more. The entry breaks off. Ink smeared across the page. No further pages remain. The parish debate. The parish council met twice that autumn to debate the Vargas case. Should the family be exiled? Should Janek be placed in the care of physicians, or locked away for the safety of all? Opinions clashed. Some cried that the boy was innocent, a victim of forces unseen. Others argued that by allowing him to remain, the entire quarter risked damnation. In the end, no action was taken. Fear stilled their hands. No one wished to be the one to confront the family, to cross the threshold of that candlelit room. And so the Vargas remained, trapped in their crumbling house, abandoned by neighbors, relatives and church alike. The growing unease, as winter approached, the atmosphere in Prague darkened. It was not only the Vargas who suffered. Many in the quarter reported restless nights, waking with the sense of eyes upon them. Children wept in their sleep, muttering the name Janek. Shops closed early, the streets grew quiet, and doors were bolted before the evening bell. Some said the boy's wakefulness was spreading, that his curse had begun to seep into others. A few swore they had not slept soundly in weeks, their dreams broken by whisper. Whether imagination or infection, the fear became collective. The question of blood. It was during this time that the darkest rumor surfaced, that Janek had not always been this way, and that something in his birth marked him. Some whispered he was conceived on All Hallows' Eve, that his mother had once sought charms from a Romani seer. Others insisted a stillborn sibling had preceded him, and that his soul was divided. None of these claims were ever proved, but the gossip served its purpose, to make the boy less a child and more an omen, a vessel for all the community's unspoken fears, a house bound in shadows. By year's end, the Vargas house was described as a lantern of dread. The candle burned every night, never extinguished. The shutters remained half closed as though the family feared both what was outside and what was in. The street itself grew hushed around it, as if the building had become a wound upon the city, and inside, the boy still sat, wide-eyed, unblinking, listening to voices none could hear. The cold openings of winter. It is here, at the threshold of winter, that the story takes its darker turn. The documents shift from rumors and scattered accounts to chilling testimonies of those who dared enter the house once more. What they found there was not only a boy who could not sleep, but a family unraveling under the weight of something neither seen nor named. The secrets of the Vargas were no longer hidden. They had begun to seep into the cracks of their home, into the minds of their neighbors, into the very stones of the street. And though Janek remained awake, it seemed all of Prague began to dream the same nightmare. By the turn of winter, 1892, the Vargas household had ceased to be merely a place of curiosity. It was a wound in the quarter, festering, radiating unease.
and for those who dared cross its threshold, the memories never left them. What follows are the accounts of those final visitors, men and women who witnessed firsthand what the boy had become. The scholar from Vienna. One of the most telling records comes from a letter written by Professor Emil Schreiber, a physician of Vienna, who traveled to Prague that December. His reputation in neurology brought him to the Vargas house at the urging of Charles University. His letter to a colleague reads, "I entered with the expectation of hysteria, of nervous derangement caused by deprivation. What I encountered unsettled me profoundly." The boy sat upright in a wooden chair, his frame wasted to skin and bone, his eyes open wide, ringed in black. His gaze did not fix upon me but rather upon the wall behind me, as though something stood there. His lips moved in constant murmur. His mother informed me he had not ceased speaking for weeks, though often no one could understand him. The words came in whispers in syllables unknown to her. I attempted to close his eyes by hand. He resisted with such force I was shocked his frail body could manage it. His heart raced. His breath came sharp. Only when I released him did he calm. I confess I was glad to leave. My conclusion, though shameful, is that his case belongs not to medicine but to theology. I will not return. The letter was never published. It was found only in Schreiber's private correspondence, sealed after his death. The infant's decline. By Christmas, the youngest child of the Vargas was failing. The babe, unnamed in the records, grew cold even beside the stove, his cries diminishing to faint whimper. A neighbor reported that Aneta carried him constantly, rocking him near the fire, but the warmth did not take. In one account, Dorota wrote, "The child is pale as candle wax. His breath is shallow. My sister says he will not close his eyes either, though his lids flutter as if trying. She is undone pacing the floors. She says she hears whispers through the infant's cries, voices not his own. God help us all." The babe did not survive the winter. His burial is recorded in the parish ledger without detail, only his surname and the note, "Child of Aneta and Miroslav Varga, deceased in infancy." Yet many whispered he was not truly dead, that he was taken, claimed by the same shadows that clung to his brother. The house as witness. Several visitors noted the strange condition of the house itself. Cracks spidered along the plaster walls as though the structure buckled under invisible weight. The air smelled always of wax and smoke, heavy, oppressive. Doors creaked though no draught stirred, and always there were the shadows slipping along the walls, gathering in corners, sometimes darting across the room though the candle flame did not waver. One man, Antonin Kral, who delivered firewood, testified, "I carried the logs inside and felt the heat vanish from my hand. The walls were damp with frost though the fire roared." The boy stared at me and said, "Do not stay. They are behind you." When I turned I saw nothing, but I heard something, a rustle like cloth dragged over stone. I dropped the wood and fled. I would sooner freeze than enter again. The sister's condition. By this time Marika had grown ghost-like. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her words were troubling. A merchant's wife swore that Marika told her in passing, "They are patient. They do not want him yet. They are learning from him." Another account claims she was seen scratching symbols into the frost on the window panes, circles, crosses and figures like tall men with bent backs. When asked what she drew, she whispered, "It keeps them from me." For a time, no one pressed her further. The girl vanished from public sight soon after, shut away with her family. The candle's secret. It was also in winter that the truth of the candle was revealed, though most thought it a simple flame kept alive by fear. One letter suggests otherwise. Written by Dorota once more, it states, "I asked Aneta why she wastes so much wax. She told me it is not wax at all. She melts strange tallow, brought from a butcher, who sells her meat from beasts I do not know. She shapes the candles herself, whispering prayers as she pours. She swears the light is the only thing that keeps him from falling." When I pressed her, she wept and said, "If the light dies, he will die too, and not alone." This confession struck terror into the few who read it, for if the candle was not merely a ward but a lifeline, then each flame was a fragile tether, holding Janek from the abyss. The return of Father Kavan. Though shaken by his earlier failure, Father Kavan returned once more to the house, compelled by conscience. His account, preserved in his own hand, is among the most disturbing. The boy sat as before, rigid, staring, his lips moved ceaselessly. I bade the mother leave the room, and I prayed aloud, sprinkling holy water. At first nothing stirred, then the candle flared and guttered, though no wind was present. The boy's eyes rolled back, yet they did not close. His body shook as if gripped by unseen hands. I heard whispers behind me. 2, 3, Perhaps more voices, speaking in unison, saying my name, my name. I confess I faltered. The shadows stretched upon the walls, taller than the ceiling, their arms outspread. I fled the chamber. Forgive me, Lord. I could not remain. He never returned again. The community's fear. By the year's end, the Vargas were completely abandoned. No doctor, priest or relative came to their aid. Their house was avoided. Their names spoken only in whispers. Children shivered when passing the corner, muttering prayers. Some even claimed the street itself had grown colder, the stones freezing first outside the Vargas home. A rumor took root that the family was no longer entirely human, that their house was not a home, but a threshold, a doorway for something waiting in the dark.
The boy himself. And yet, through all this, Janek remained, frail, hollow-eyed, trembling but alive. He had outlasted every expectation. He sat in his chair, the candle burning beside him, his gaze fixed always upon some unseen horizon. He told his mother once, overheard by a neighbor, "They are almost ready. They are waiting for me to fall. But I will not close my eyes." And indeed he did not. Not then, not in the months that followed. A winter without rest. Prague that winter lay buried in snow. Yet the Vargas home remained lit each night, the candle casting its strange glow. Neighbors passing at dawn swore they saw movement in the windows, more than one figure, more than a family could account for. One butcher's boy swore he saw faces pressed to the glass, pale and eyeless, watching the street. Another claimed he heard singing faint and low, though no one within had voice enough to raise such a sound. The family remained unseen by day, their shutters closed. By night the house seemed alive with whispers and shadows. Toward the end, as the year turned to 1893, the Vargas stood at the edge of collapse, the infant buried, Marika withdrawn, Moroslav broken, Aneta wasting away, and at the center the boy who never slept, burning himself away like the tallow of his mother's candles. What held him upright? No one could say, whether will, terror, or some darker force. Janek endured. His eyes remained open, unblinking, fixed upon the shadows gathering around him. And those who dared glance through the window swore the shadows were changing. They were not merely shapes now. They were growing clearer, sharper, almost human, almost red. By the opening weeks of 1893, the Vargas household had become a kind of living grave. The neighbors knew it, though few would admit aloud. The family had grown thinner, their steps slower, their shutters always closed. And Janek, the boy at the heart of it all, was unraveling. His survival had gone from marvel to horror, for no child should remain upright for years without rest. His body wasted, yet still he sat in that same chair, eyes locked open, as if the moment he allowed them to fall shut, the world itself might end. The first true collapse. Dorota, the aunt who had borne witness since the beginning, recorded one final entry in her hidden journal. The paper is brittle now, the ink faint, but the words are still legible. "I was with Aneta when it began." The boy gasped suddenly, as if drowning in air. His head fell forward, his lips white. For the first time in years, his eyelids lowered, not fully, only a tremble downward, but it was enough. The candle shuddered as if struck by wind, and in the corner, I swear before God Almighty, I saw something rise from the floor. It was not shadow but substance, a shape like a man, tall, gaunt, arms longer than they should be. It bent toward the boy. I screamed and struck the candle with my hand. The flame leapt higher, and the thing was gone. But the boy's eyes remained closed a heartbeat too long. When they opened, they were not his eyes. They were full of black. Dorota left the house that night, and never returned. She fled Prague altogether, settling in Brno, under her maiden name. Her journal was found decades later in an attic chest, confirming what had long been whispered. The father's undoing. Moroslav Varga, once a proud mason, had by then lost his strength. He no longer worked. He no longer spoke. Witnesses who glimpsed him in the rare moments he stepped outside described him as a husk, shoulders bent, lips cracked. He carried only wood and bread, never meeting another's gaze. One butcher swore that Moroslav muttered to himself, "It is not my house anymore. It belongs to them." In later years, a rumor spread that he had carved strange marks into the beams of his own home, lines and runes like claw scratches, circling the chair where Janek sat. Some claimed he had struck the walls with his hammer, desperate to hold the structure together against the invisible weight pressing in. Whatever the truth, Moroslav's strength failed him soon after. He was found slumped outside the churchyard one morning, snow crusted on his beard, his breath gone. The priest refused to let his body rest within consecrated ground. Moroslav was buried at the edge of the cemetery near the fence, where shadows stretched long. The sisters whisper. Morika, the elder sister, had grown pale as parchment. She no longer left the house, but her voice carried through the shutters. Children playing in the street swore they heard her chanting, not in Czech or Latin, but in broken syllables that twisted the tongue. One child, 10-year-old Petr Dalazar, later testified as an old man. She spoke in whispers, but I knew the words were not hers. I was only a boy, but I felt they were older than the stones of Prague. When I looked at her window, her face was there, pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and hollow, and something else, another face beside hers, pale as milk, with no mouth, only eyes. I ran and never looked back. No record shows what became of Morika after that winter. She simply vanished. Some said she succumbed to fever. Others said she walked into the Vltava river and did not return. But the strongest rumor, whispered in the taverns of Prague, was that she had not died at all, that she had joined the shadows, her body never found because it no longer belonged to the living. The mother's vigil. Aneta endured longer than any of them. Her devotion to her son became madness, though perhaps it was madness that sustained her. She burned her strange candles day and night, never letting the flame fall. When one guttered, she replaced it instantly, as if the boy's life depended on it. She was seen in the marketplace only rarely, her eyes hollow, her hands blackened from wax and smoke. A merchant's wife claimed that Aneta whispered bargains under her breath, while buying tallow, pleading with saints and devils alike. In one chilling account, preserved in a private letter, Aneta was overheard murmuring, "If they take him, they will take me too, but not yet, not yet. I will keep him awake." The night without light. It was in February of 1893 that the inevitable came. A storm rolled over Prague, drowning the streets in snow and wind. The Vargas home, already fragile, shook with each gust. And then, sometime after midnight, the candle went out. No one knows why. Some said the wax failed. Others claimed Aneta collapsed from exhaustion and could not relight it. But all who lived nearby swore the same thing, that when the candle died, the shadows in the Vargas home spread like smoke into the street. One neighbor wrote, "The shutters flew open though the windows did not break. A blackness poured out, not like night but thicker, alive. It crawled across the snow, and in it I heard voices, hundreds of voices, whispering as one. I saw figures bending through the dark, tall and thin, their limbs stretching too far, and in the window the boy's face, eyes wide, mouth open as if screaming, though no sound reached us. The storm passed by dawn, but when the neighbors crept to the house, they found it silent. What remained? Inside, the air was heavy with soot, the walls were blackened, the beams cracked, the furniture lay overturned, as though struck by a mighty force, and in the center, on his chair, sat Janek Varga, upright, still, his eyes open, but lifeless. Aneta lay on the floor beside him, clutching his hand, her face frozen in terror. She had died there, her body rigid as though turned to stone. No trace of Morika was ever found. The parish refused to take them. Their bodies were buried in an unmarked grave beyond the cemetery wall. Only Janek's chair was left, burned and broken, carried away by the fearful. The house itself remained for some years. Tenants came and went, never lasting more than a few nights. They spoke of cold air, of whispering voices in the walls, of eyes staring from the corners at night. By the turn of the century, the building was abandoned altogether. In 1902, it was finally demolished, but the workers refused to touch the foundation. They claimed the earth beneath was black, soft as ash, and that tools broke when striking the stones. Today, nothing remains of the Varga home. The street has changed, the buildings rebuilt, but old residents point to the spot and warn their children, do not linger there, for the boy who never slept still watches. The legacy, the tale of Janek Varga, survives only in fragments, parish notes, letters, a crumbling journal. Skeptics dismiss it as folklore, an exaggeration born of hysteria, yet the record remains. A boy who did not sleep for years, whose family wasted away, whose house became a wound in Prague itself. And those who study such things point out one final chilling detail. Janek's eyes when he was found were not the dull gray of the dead. They were black, entirely black. The winter that followed the collapse of the Varga household was a season of silence in Prague. It was said that the snow fell thicker that year, muffling even the sound of the carriages on cobblestones. But in that silence people began to speak, not in the open, not in the taverns where ears were too near,
but in corners, in kitchens, and behind church doors. They whispered of the boy, of the family ruined, and of the house that had poured its darkness into the street. The city had endured plague, fire and war. It was no stranger to death, yet something about the Vargas unsettled even the oldest among them. Not the boy's death itself. Children perished often in that time, but the manner of it, his eyes, his body upright, the mother dead beside him, the sister vanished. Death should have brought relief. Instead it deepened the unease. The parish refusal. When the priest Father Holib was called to bless the bodies, he hesitated. His letter, preserved in the diocesan archive, reads, "I cannot allow the boy into consecrated ground. There is no peace in his body. His eyes remain open, and I cannot close. It is not death but something else. If I bless him, I bless the thing that dwells within." Holib argued for burial beyond the walls in unconsecrated earth. His superior urged him to relent. The family deserved rest, but Holib would. He performed only a minimal rite for Aneta, whispering the words quickly, as if afraid they might cling to his tongue. The boy's grave was dug at the edge of the yard, near the iron fence where weeds grew thick. No marker was set, yet those who buried him swore that as the soil fell upon his chest, his eyes remained open until the last clod of dirt struck his face. The doctor's obsession. If the church wanted distance, the physicians wanted answers. Records from the Prague medical faculty reveal that at least 3 doctors visited the Vargas home before demolition. Their notes survive only in fragments, but they speak of curiosity bordering on hunger. One physician, Radek Schick, wrote, "The condition of the boy defies every natural explanation. Complete absence of sleep for years would end in death long before 14, and yet his body, while wasted, remained animate. I inspected the chair upon which he died. Its arms were worn smooth, not by movement, but by a kind of tension, as if his grip had burned into the wood. This was not illness alone. This was resistance. Resistance against sleep itself." Another, unnamed in the records, suggested that Janek had not merely avoided sleep, but had been prevented from it, as though external will had bound him. Such language was unusual for a medical file. There was even talk of exhumation, but Father Holib refused permission. "Leave him," he wrote, "for if he rises again, it will not be as a boy." Whispers at the fence. It was the children who first began to gather near the fence where Janek was buried. They would dare each other to approach after dusk, to stand close enough to see through the weeds. Many swore they heard breathing slow, ragged, as if someone lay just beneath the soil. Others described a whisper that did not come from one place, but from all around. The same phrase repeated endlessly, "Stay awake, stay awake." One boy returned home with scratches across his arm. Though no bramble grew near the grave, he claimed a hand had reached through the soil to grip him. His parents left Prague soon after. The shadow in the window. Though the house had been emptied, neighbors swore it was not truly abandoned. At night, they said, a figure still sat in the upstairs window, thin, motionless, eyes open. Some claimed it was Janek himself, unchanged. Others whispered it was Marika, returned in silence. A visiting tradesman recorded in his diary, "I walked past the Varga home on the 12th of May. The street was deserted, but in the window, I saw a pale face. The eyes caught the moonlight, and for a moment I felt certain they looked into me, not at me." I hurried on, and when I glanced back, the window was empty, yet I could not shake the feeling that I had carried those eyes with me. This was not an isolated account. At least 7 different testimonies from that year mentioned the same detail. A figure in the window, never moving, always watching. The scholars' circle. By the late 1890s, the Varga case had become more than gossip. A circle of occult scholars, men who studied folklore, spiritualism, and the occult sciences, took keen interest. Among them was Professor Emil Landa, a historian of Moravian folklore. His notes, preserved in a private collection, draw disturbing parallels. There are tales in the Carpathians of the Nespavek, the sleepless one, a cursed child who cannot close his eyes for fear of being claimed by the shadow men. These beings are said to feed upon the threshold between waking and sleep. They come when a candle falters, when a room is darkest, when the breath slows. The sleepless one resists until his body collapses, but in death the eyes remain open. The grave never holds them fully. Landa believed Janek to be a living example of this legend. He urged the medical faculty to exhume the body. They refused. He then urged the church to seal the grave with iron. That too was refused. Yet his writings began to circulate privately, spreading the story of the sleepless boy beyond Prague. The grave avoided. By the turn of the century, Janek's resting place was a mark of dread. The cemetery grew, new stones rising in neat rows, but his corner remained empty, overgrown, avoided even by the grave diggers. Some said the earth there was too soft, always sinking, as if hollow beneath. One old woman was quoted, "If you lie too near him, you do not rest, you keep one eye open, even in death." Superstition grew so strong that a new iron fence was raised, not to keep outsiders away, but to keep whatever lay beneath from creeping outward. The legend spreads. It did not remain a local fear. Travelers carried the tale abroad. By 1905, newspapers as far as Vienna and Berlin printed small columns about the boy who never slept. Some dismissed it as hysteria, a relic of Prague's darker folklore, but others repeated it with shivers, especially the detail of the grave. In one issue of Prager Tagblatt, an anonymous columnist wrote, "The citizens of Zhechkov Quarter refuse to walk the road by the old Varga plot after dark. They say the boy's shadow still leans from the ground, long and thin, stretching across the stone. The curious who visit do not sleep well afterward. They wake in the night with the sense that someone is beside them, eyes wide, whispering in their ear." By then, the Vargas were no longer a family, but a fable. Yet the fable held teeth, and it bit at those who dared to linger too close.
The Black Grave. What remains most chilling is this. Every attempt to mark the boy's grave failed. Wooden crosses withered overnight. Stone markers cracked. Even iron plates rusted to dust within months. By the 1920s, there was no trace of burial, only a patch of blackened soil where grass would not grow. Locals called it Cherny Hob, the Black Grave. Children were warned never to step upon it. Lovers avoided it. Drunks skirted wide. Even grave diggers refused to pass their lanterns over it, muttering that the light faltered there. And so the boy who never slept found his rest, not in peace, but in dread. His grave remained a wound in the cemetery, a reminder that some sleep is not natural, and some graves do not heal. There are stories that live only in whispers, and there are those that sink into paper, clinging to ink and parchment like mold. The tragedy of the Varga boy was not merely remembered, it was recorded. Physicians, priests, and occultists alike attempted to wrestle the tale into words, though the words themselves seem stained by unease. The surviving fragments scattered across archives and private collections form a crooked mosaic of obsession. They reveal not simply a boy who would not sleep, but a child who had become the center of something far older, something the written word could barely contain. The physician's ledger. Among the files of the Prague medical faculty lies an unusual ledger, marked Case 42. The entries are unsigned, but scholars attribute them to Dr. Radek Schwecht, who had seen Janek in life. The handwriting is steady, clinical at first, before trembling into something close to mania. The earliest note reads, "Subject male, 14 reports complete insomnia persisting for 4 years. Parents confirm inability to induce sleep through laudanum, opiates or hypnotic methods. Patient reports nightly visions of shadowed figures, auditory hallucinations of whispers, physically wasted, yet consciousness sustained beyond all natural limit. I suspect delusion and hysteria within the family, but subject's eyes do not deceive. He has not slept." Months later, a second entry darkens. "I examined the remains after the event of February. Decomposition irregular. Skin pallor suggests a preservation not accounted for by temperature. Eyes remained open, unnaturally so. Musculature about the lids stiff as though never trained to shut." My colleagues laughed when I said this. The boy had forgotten how to close his eye. By the final page, Schwecht no longer wrote as a doctor, "This is not illness, this is occupation." Something entered the boy, and in resisting it he burned through years of life in hours. Sleep was the door. He barred it, but the thing waited. Patient is dead, yet I cannot call it death. I recommend the grave be sealed with iron, lest the door reopen. The Journal of Dorota. We return again to Dorota, the aunt who fled. It is her private journal, discovered in Brna in 1921, that provides the most chilling testimony. For though she escaped the Varga home, the memory never released her. She wrote of dreams that plagued her for decades. "I wake and find myself back in that room, the chair still in the corner, the candle guttering low. Janek sits upright, but when he turns his face to me, it is hollowed out, the eyes gone. From the sockets pour shapes like fingers, grasping, clutching, pulling me toward him. I scream, but no sound comes. Always I wake with my heart pounding, certain that something has followed me into waking." Her last entry, penned only days before her death, is the most unsettling. I have not slept in 3 nights. I am afraid to. I hear whispers in the corners, the same words he heard. Stay awake, stay awake. Perhaps it is hereditary. Perhaps it is hereditary. Perhaps it is contagion. Or perhaps it is simply memory. But I fear the shadows that sought him have learned my name as well. The occult manuscript. In 1898, Professor Emil Lander compiled a treatise he never dared publish. The manuscript Dyspepsy, the Sleepless Ones, circulates only in rare copies. In it he connects Janek's affliction to folklore across Eastern Europe. He cites stories of children cursed to remain awake until death, watched by figures described as Dlohi Muji, the long men. These beings were said to come when lamps failed, feeding upon the moment between waking and sleep. Lander wrote, "If one resists sleep long enough, the veil thins. The sleepless one becomes both beacon and barrier. Through them the shadow men press into our world. In this way the sleepless child is both victim and gatekeeper. His life is torment, but his death is catastrophe. For once the eyes close, the gate collapses and what presses against it may spill through." Lander believed Janek's death was not release, but rupture, that the storm of February 93 marked the spilling of shadows from boy to house, from house to street. The Black Notebook. In 1901 a notebook surfaced among the belongings of a grave digger named Josef Rez. He had worked the cemetery where Janek was buried, and his notes are little more than crude scrolls, but they reveal something that cannot be ignored. "I dug near the black grave. The earth there is wrong. It sinks even when dry. The soil smells of iron, though none is buried there. I put my hand down once, and it burned cold. Sometimes at night when the moon is out, I see eyes in the dirt. Not one pair but many, all staring. They do not blink." Rezek's handwriting becomes more frantic toward the end. The boy's grave hums, not sound, but a hum inside the head. "I cannot rest. My wife says I mutter in sleep though I have no dream. I wake and find dirt beneath my nails. I think I dig at night, though I do not leave my bed." Rezek drowned in the Vltava River. Later that year, his notebook was never claimed by his family. The clash of faith and science. By the early 20th century, the case of the sleepless boy had split Prague into 2 camps. The clergy insisted it was a matter of demonic interference, best left buried in silence. The physicians argued it was a medical anomaly, a neurological condition yet unnamed, and the scholars, whispering in private rooms, insisted it was older than both, a folklore made flesh. What unites their testimonies is the sense that Janek had not merely suffered, but had carried something, whether disease, demon, or myth. It had lingered after his death, seeping into those who touched his memory. The lingering record. Even today the archives hold these papers. Scholars approach them with curiosity, only to set them aside with unease, not because of what they say, but because of what happens after. Readers report sleepless nights, or whispers in the dark corners of their rooms. One archivist, cataloging Dorota's journal in 1978, resigned days later, leaving only a note. "The boy still watches. I cannot keep reading." The paper remains, brittle and yellowing, but few dare linger too long on its words. The weight of the records. What these scattered documents reveal is not a single boy's tragedy, but a pattern, an infection of fear, of sleeplessness, spreading through ink itself. Each writer, whether doctor, aunt or gravedigger, began in reason and ended in dread. It is as if the story could not be told without consuming the teller. And so the case of Janek Varga is not merely remembered, it is alive, written into history like a curse. For the boy never slept, and perhaps, in the pages that bear his name, he still does not. By the turn of the century, the story of the sleepless boy was no longer confined to a single ruined house, or a blackened grave. It had begun to seep outward, spreading like smoke through the narrow streets of Prague. At first it was dismissed as rumor, children daring one another near the cemetery, tradesmen telling tales over mugs of dark beer, but the whispers persisted, and before long they grew. Prague was a city that lived by its clocks. Bells told the hours from every steeple, dividing days into steady rhythm. But in those years, the rhythm began to falter. Men and women spoke of waking at strange times, always between 2 and 3 in the morning, their hearts racing, ears straining for sounds that never resolved. Some claimed to hear scratching in their walls. Others swore they saw thin silhouettes pass beneath their door, and almost all of them confessed one common dread. They feared to fall asleep. The candle test.
An odd ritual began to spread among households near Zhishkov, where the Vargas had lived. Families placed a single candle by their beds each night, refusing to let the room lie in complete darkness. The belief was simple: as long as the flame burned, the shadows could not gather. But it was said that in some houses, the flame guttered without cause, wax would collapse, wicks blacken, and in the instant of darkness, something would move. Children awoke screaming of voices calling their name. One girl, age 7, claimed she felt long fingers brush her cheek as the light died. Her parents left Prague within the month. By 1904, candle makers in the quarter could not keep pace with demand. Neighbors spoke grimly of the Vargas trade, for every home now feared the same fate: a night without light, the sleepless affliction. Doctors noted an unusual rise in cases of chronic insomnia in the district. What troubled them most was not merely the lack of sleep, but the uniformity of the reports. Patients described the same visions: the tall figures, the whispers urging them awake. A physician named Dr. Helena Cherna compiled these testimonies. In her notebook she wrote, "This is not individual madness, nor is it contagious in the ordinary sense. It is suggestion. Once the story is known, the symptoms begin. The mind resists sleep, for fear that something waits there. Yet it is not merely fear, for patients describe identical images. If delusion, then a shared one, drawn from the same source. If reality, then we are brushing against a phenomenon beyond medicine." Dr. Cherna herself fell ill within a year. Her colleagues reported she no longer slept more than an hour each night, insisting that a boy with hollow eyes stood at the foot of her bed. She died of heart failure in 1906, aged only 40. The market incident. One of the most chilling accounts comes from the public marketplace in Old Town Square. In the summer of 1905, several stalls collapsed after a sudden rush of panic. Witnesses reported that a shadow, tall and thin, had stretched across the square though no clouds darkened the sun. A baker's apprentice described it thus: "It was like a man's shadow, but no man stood there. It stretched too far, from no source. When it moved, everyone froze. Then we heard whispers, not loud but inside our heads. Some covered their ears, but it made no difference. The shadow bent as if it were looking down at us, and then the stalls shook, and people screamed and we fled." The city guard reported no explanation, dismissing it as hysteria. Yet half the merchants refused to return for weeks, and some never again. The archivist's account, perhaps most disturbing, are the words of archivist Pavel Kral, who worked in the diocesan vault, where Father Holub's refusal letter was kept. In 1910, Kral added his own note to the file: "I was cataloguing when I heard the rustle of paper, though no hand touched it. The file of the boy slid from its shelf and opened on the floor. The letter lay there, the ink darker than it should have been, as if newly written. I picked it up, and in that moment, I saw, God forgive me, I saw eyes staring up through the paper. They were not printed, not drawn, but real. I dropped the page, but when I looked again it was only ink. Since then I have not slept. I hear him whisper in the dark, 'Do not close your eyes, or you will see what I see.'" Kral resigned 2 months later. He drowned himself in the Vltava, not far from where Josef Rezek the grave digger had perished years before. The spreading fear. By now the tale of Janek Varga was no longer confined to Prague. Newspapers in Vienna, Munich and even London printed small sensational pieces about the boy who never slept. Spiritualist societies debated his case, using it as proof of a veil between worlds. What unsettled most was not the boy's suffering but the persistence of his presence. He had become a symbol of unrest, of what it meant to be denied the mercy of dream. The sleepless began to claim they felt close to him, that he wandered their nights, seated in the corner of their rooms, eyes wide, never blinking. The night of bells. In 1912, Prague was shaken by an event still whispered among the old. On a winter's night, every bell in the city tolled at once, deep, hollow, mournful. The time was recorded, 2:53 in the morning. Citizens rushed into the streets, thinking fire or invasion, but the air was still. No flames, no army, only the bells, clanging as if struck by invisible hands. And then just as suddenly, they ceased. The following day 6 deaths were reported, all in Zhishkov, all victims found in their beds, eyes wide open, bodies rigid. Doctors marked the cause as cardiac seizure, but neighbors whispered another word: Varga, the grave's influence. Through it all the black grave remained untouched, avoided like plague. Some brave souls sought to destroy it, hoping to break the curse. In 1915, a group of young men dug into the soil after midnight, daring each other to unearth the boy's remains. They did not finish. At dawn only one returned to the street, trembling, hair turned white. He never spoke of what he saw except once, to a priest. The grave was not empty, but it was not a body. It was a hole without bottom, and it was watching us. The others were never found. The earth where they dug was soft again within days, as though no spade had touched. The unrest grows. By the eve of the First World War, the Varga legend had become indistinguishable from the life of the city itself. The sleepless walked its streets at night, fearful of what waited in dreams. Candles burned in windows long after midnight. Mothers hushed their children with a single warning: do not look into the shadows, for the boy is still awake. The city lived on, yes, but it lived uneasily, as if the rhythm of night and day had been forever broken. It is said that in every haunting, there comes a moment when the veil can no longer hold. The whispers that drift like smoke finally take form, and what has lingered at the edges of sight steps fully into view. For Prague, that moment arrived in the autumn of 1917, in the midst of a war that had already drowned the city in grief. But this grief was of another order, the return of the shadows. Reports began in the district of Žižkov once more, where it had all begun. Families claimed that after midnight, their houses grew colder than the street outside. Frost crept across window panes, though no winter wind stirred, and in those hours, shadows no longer clung merely to walls. They detached, stretching across ceilings, bending at angles impossible to light. Children spoke of a boy standing among them, thin and silent, his eyes wide and shimmering as if filled with candlelight. One girl whispered that he leaned close and said, "You are almost ready." No one understood what readiness meant, but soon they...
The scholar's confession, among the last attempts to understand the phenomenon, was made by Professor Tomáš Havel, a folklorist at Charles University. He believed the Varga case was more than superstition, more than nervous contagion. Havel traced stories of the sleepless back through Moravian tales, further still into Hungarian folk song, where verses told of the hollow child who cannot dream, for the dreamers drag him down. The professor suggested that Janek was not the first, but merely the latest vessel of an ancient affliction, children born without the ability to cross fully into sleep. Their minds, he wrote, remain half in our world, half in another. They see what others cannot, not dreams, but inhabitants of the dark. Havel's final paper, never published, bore a single line at its close: sleep is not rest, it is passage. The boy never crossed, and so the passage crossed into us. Weeks later, Havel was found dead at his desk, his pen snapped in two, his body stiff. His eyelids had been sewn open with thread. No culprit was ever found. The hollow eyes. By now the image of Janek Varga had become more than legend. Citizens described seeing his likeness reflected in mirrors, particularly when half asleep. In dim glass, one might catch sight of a boy standing behind the viewer, his gaze unblinking, his mouth slightly open as if whispering words just beyond hearing. Those who stared too long reported a sensation of falling forward, not into the glass, but into the hollows of his eyes, as though they were caverns with no end. Several of these witnesses later took their own lives, unable to bear the sensation that they had glimpsed something infinite and waiting. The testimony of Father Novak. The church, long reluctant to address the matter after Holub's refusal, finally permitted one priest to investigate. Father Antonín Novak, a man known for quiet devotion rather than public spectacle, entered the Varga graveyard one winter night. He carried no ritual implements, only a crucifix and a notebook. He did not return whole. His journal was later recovered, its final pages written in a hand so shaky that ink bled into near illegibility. One passage stands out: "I prayed above the boy's resting place, yet my voice echoed not into heaven but downward. The earth beneath me moved as though it were hollow, and the sound was not of soil but of breathing. The shadow rose, and within it eyes opened. He did not speak with lips, but with silence that crushed thought. I know now he was never hunted by the shadows. He was their herald. His sleeplessness was not curse, but calling." Novak vanished a week later. His cassock was found on the banks of the Vltava, folded neatly, his shoes placed side by side. His body was never discovered. The Black Procession. Then came the event which no chronicle can dismiss as rumor. The so-called Black Procession of night. On a fog-heavy night in November, dozens of citizens reported the same sight. Along the narrow street of Hositska, A line of figures walked silently, barefoot, cloaked in shadows that did not match their movement. They carried nothing, said nothing. At the front of the procession, witnesses swore, was a boy with hollow eyes, his steps perfectly measured. The strange march lasted less than 5 minutes, but in the morning 10 households awoke to find their eldest children gone. Bed sheets lay rumpled, pillows indented, yet no door or window showed disturbance. None of those children were ever found. The city council forbade mention of the incident, fearing panic. But those who lived along Hositska never forgot. Even now they call it the street where children vanish. The revelation. What then was the truth of Janek Varga? Not simply a boy who could not sleep, not merely a victim of shadows. He was the breach itself, the doorway. His body, weakened by years of sleeplessness, had thinned the veil until the watchers behind it could lean through. His death did not close that breach. It widened it, anchoring it to Prague like a stone dropped in water. The shadows were not his tormentors, they were his kin. Some scholars whispered he was changeling, left by something not human, incapable of human rest. Others believed he was human but chosen marked at birth to be the vessel of what lies between sleep and death. Whatever the truth, the conclusion was the same. When Janek refused to sleep, the city was forced to dream in his place. The endless vigil. By the war's end, Prague was exhausted, scarred not only by battles and hunger, but by a restlessness that seemed beyond human endurance. Families spoke of a strange fatigue in the air, as though the very cobblestones longed for sleep, but dared not close their eyes. And still the shadows lingered. The sleepless affliction did not vanish with the war. Some carried it like inheritance, a curse passed from one generation to the next. A handful of families left Prague altogether, claiming the boy's presence would never release the city. Yet wherever they traveled, some swore they still saw him in windows, in glass, in the silence before dawn. The last warning. Among the few records from this period survives a fragment of parchment, believed to be penned by Father Novak before his disappearance. It contains only 3 sentences. The boy is not dead. He is awake in every shadow. Do not close your eyes, for he is patient, and he waits. Prague never fully recovered. Even now, more than a century later, old families warn their children not to linger by Janek's grave, not to whisper his name after dark, and never, never to extinguish the last candle before sleep, for he is still there, and he is still awake. There is a peculiar silence that follows certain tragedies, as though the city itself holds its breath. After the war, after the procession, after the missing children, Prague learned to bury the memory of Janek Varga, as one buries plague pits, under soil, stone and silence. But the earth remembers. The black grave sealed in 1921, the Varga grave was at last sealed with iron. A committee of priests and officials placed a cross of blackened metal across the mound. Its base sunk deep into the soil. Chains were riveted around it, as though binding a prisoner beneath. A plaque bore a single word: Somnus, sleep. Yet the locals did not rest. They avoided the cemetery, leaving flowers only at its gates. The cross, they said, trembled when the wind was still. Sometimes faint whispers rose from the soil, though no ear could make out the word. The surviving families, in the decades that followed, families of Zhega, carried a strange inheritance. Children grew restless, waking often at night, whispering of voices outside their windows. Some of these families emigrated to Vienna, to America, to Canada, but the affliction followed. In Cleveland, 1934, a Czech family reported their eldest son had died with eyes wide open, seated upright in a chair. In Toronto, 1949, a girl was found wandering her house at dawn, whispering in Czech, though she had never learned the language. In each case, neighbors described the same fear, that someone unseen stood in the corner of the room waiting. The curse, it seemed, was not bound by borders. The war years, even the Second World War, did not erase the legend. In 1942, during the occupation, a German officer stationed in Prague kept a diary. Among its entries is this chilling note: "We are told the city is restless. I laugh at this. Until last, at 2 o'clock I woke with my men standing in the hall, all pale, all swearing they had heard footsteps in the barracks, though none were on watch. In the corner of my chamber stood a boy, frail, with eyes wide. He whispered only once, 'You must not sleep.' Then he was gone." The officer deserted a month later. His body was found in the woods outside Dresden, frozen upright against a tree, eyes unclosed. The scholar's dilemma. In the mid-20th century, attempts were made to rationalize the legend. Psychologists called it Varga syndrome,
a form of hereditary insomnia coupled with mass hysteria. Folklorists insisted it was a remnant of old superstitions, sharpened by war and poverty, but the files, those who read them say, tell a different story. Too many deaths with eyes open, too many witnesses describing the same figure, across decades, across continents. The pattern was undeniable. Some scholars abandoned their work, claiming to hear whispers while reviewing the document. A few were found dead, their desks cluttered with drafts left unfinished, candles burned down to wax pools. The lingering fear, even into modern times, the legend has not faded. Elderly residents of Prague still insist that if you pass the Varga grave after midnight, you must not look directly at it. They say a shape leans against the iron cross thin as a branch, watching every passerby. Tourists laugh, taking photographs. Yet the photographs often blur, and in some, a figure appears, a boy seated in a chair, eyes wide, hands on his knees, always in shadow, always watching. The nature of the curse, and so the final truth of Janek Varga, cannot be stated plainly, but it can be suggested. Sleep, the ancients believed, is a kind of death. Each night we pass through the gate and return. Janek never crossed, he remained in waking, and so the gate swung open from the other side. What came through were not dreams, nor mere shadows, but inhabitants of that place between rest and death. He was not only their victim, he was their threshold, and thresholds once opened do not close. The present, even now in our age of light and machines, the sleepless still speak of him. They describe the same visions. The boy seated near their bed, eyes wide, never blinking, whispering that sleep is unsafe. They burn candles through the night just as their forebears did in Zhegav. More than a century ago, doctors call it night terror, or hypnagogic hallucination. Yet those afflicted know better. They know the silence that presses too thick, the breath that is not their own, the gaze that follows them into waking. And some admit a darker truth. The longer they resist sleep, the more they feel him within them, not merely watching, but wait. The final warning, a fragment of parchment, preserved in the archives of Charles University, bears words in faded ink. It is said to have been the last note of a student who vanished in 1972, his bed left cold, his chair overturned. The note reads, "Do not think of him as gone. He is the night that will not rest. When you leave your candle to burn low, when your eyes begin to close, he is there. He leans close and whispers, 'Do not sleep, for if you do, you will wake where he waits.' So if you have listened this far, remember this: when the night grows long, and the shadows in your room do not match the light, do not stare too hard, do not listen too closely, and above all, never let the last candle burn out before you rest. For somewhere in the hollow between wakefulness and dream, Janek Varga is still awake, and he has been waiting far longer than you can endure. Do not sleep.